Hello and welcome to the Animation Kimmunication podcast, your source for discussion about animation, film, fandom, and more. So please join your host, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, or KP, and Lauren Kizich, the Abbey Roadie, for today's discussion. If you like what you hear, please remember to support by giving a like, a follow, as well as subscribing to the main I Love Kim Possible a Lot channel on YouTube. Spread the word and keep being a part of a great community. This episode contains heavy adult language and is not appropriate for young children. Can't.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of Animation Kimmunication. No news this time. We're going to get straight to the interview. So I hope you guys enjoy. It's a really good one. And hopefully you learn not only about Avatar, but some other properties that have been floating around the animation cosmos in the last couple of years. And Giancarlo is a super sweet dude. So please enjoy. Yeah, so please go to the usual places if you like it, comment, or whatever. So enjoy the episode. Okay, thanks for joining us for the news. Now probably to get to the thing that most people want to hear about, because there wasn't really a lot of news anyway. So.
Yeah.
So our guest, why don't you introduce yourself? Talk about like a very broad strokes, things that you've done in the industry, and I guess I'll take it from there. So,
hello, I'm Giancarlo Volpe, and I am an animation veteran, I guess, is what they might call it.
Person.
I've animated, I've directed, etc. I've show ran. You're probably most familiar with Avatar: The Last Airbender. I also worked on King of the Hill. I show ran Green Lantern, the animated series, and was executive producer on The Dragon Prince, among a few other things that I can also talk about if you so please.
Yeah, you have quite the resume, and luckily you're very nice too. So it's always intimidating for us to be like, oh God, it's it's an EP. Oh, I hope he likes us. So
That's amazing. I'm glad that is at least my perceived, personality.
Perceived
I'm a nice guy.
is an interesting word.
Because at the end of the day, I still sort of just feel like that geeky kid that would hang out in the comic book section at the bookstore or whatever, and I've just managed to turn it into a career. And so I forget that I'm supposed to be like highfalutin or something.
It's know who I am?
I make TV shows or something.
I do things. Yeah, I mean, that's something I've felt like too. And Lauren, I'm sure you can jump in because we have the same brain length. But as I've gotten older, it's just you just kind of learn more about the thing that you already were learning about a lot anyway. And then eventually you ease yourself into producing your own stuff one way or the other, but nothing really changes. And then you go to conventions and be like, oh, it's the thing that I like that too. And you still geek out even though you're there for another reason. And it's an interesting contrast, but that's the biggest thing is I think I've matured emotionally, but my core KP has been the same. So
Yeah.
It's really true. I sometimes see people online arguing about doing fanfic or fan art and if that's valid. And the reality is I almost can't think of anyone who has not done that in the entertainment industry. That's kind of how it starts. You're a little kid and you're copying whatever cartoon you were watching at the time, and you might have even traced. There's no shame in that. Or even prior to that, you were using coloring books, and you just kind of keep adding challenges to it where it's like, well, what if I don't trace? What if I come up with a character myself instead of copy someone else's? And then suddenly you're about the right age where you need a job and you have this skill set and you're like, I can come up with characters out of the blue. Is that valuable? And hopefully a studio or whatever corporation or business says, yes, we need someone who can do that. And then and it just sort of feels like the next chapter of a thing you've been doing your entire life.
That's a really good way. So let's start on that. So how did you get into the Animotions, and like what was your personal, I guess, artistic journey, if we want to be super meta about it?
I'm trying to figure out how to answer that succinctly because I don't want to get it too far. It was a brisk summer eve in 1992. But the broad strokes of it have been drawing my whole life. Like I literally cannot remember a time when I wasn't drawing. So it's as though I came out of the womb with a crayon, but obviously not literally. I remember some pivotal moments in my childhood was I had a second grade teacher who noticed I could draw really well, at the time, and said that if I could finish my work on time, I could work on storybooks while I waited for the rest of the class to finish their work. And it was this very valuable kind of lesson where like, all right, take care of the grunt work that you don't want to do. And then the reward is you can draw pictures. And so I amassed all of these storybooks from doing that. Like I have like 20 or 30 of them that I did in like the second grade. And it really trained me to make my own comics, which my brother and I did for a while, where we would take like copywriting paper or I guess what do you call it? They used to what we would call print paper now, but this was before printers. I hate to age.
So I think it would be like Xerox copy paper kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah, that was kind of the name for it. We'd staple it, sort of fold it in half and staple the spine, so we'd have like these little homemade sketchbooks and would write and draw comics, and then we would share them with each other. So it was this, something I've been doing my entire life, and then at a certain, I think it was when I was 14, my brother discovered that there was these animation classes being taught in Seattle, and the age requirement was 13 or 14, but they encouraged 18-year-olds or whatever. And so I was this really young kid that like signed. I remember like my dad had to drive me to class.
Oh, bless.
And he would sit in the back of the room and read a Reader's Digest, which is a very old school, like sort of like, your older listener, have your listeners ask like their grandparents what Reader's Digest is, because that's how like old it is. I made my first animated film when I was 14.
Wow.
And drew it on paper and shot it on film and like synced the dialogue with so super old school. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that was a lot of work and I'm addicted and I have to do this the rest of my life.
And you filmed, did you film that on a down shooter?
Story. Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Master Oxberry is what they're called. And it had the pegs and everything. Like it was just old school animation training.
Wow.
And you grew up in the Seattle area?
I did,
assuming?
yeah. I'm from Tacoma, Washington, which is like maybe 40 miles south of Seattle, maybe less than that.
That makes sense, because I was just like, I hope you're not like driving from California to Seattle to get animation classes. Also,
Right.
Question lots of things if you're doing that.
Yeah, there's probably other classes much closer to LA if I was from LA.
Yeah.
But yeah, that did make me think of the way you were in school reminded me so much of how I was in school. Is anytime we took a test or had a worksheet, I was always drawing on the borders or on the backside of the paper. And then it got to a point where I'm like, I'm able to do the work, but I focus better when I'm drawing, right? But my teachers finally were just so defeated by trying to stop me. They're like, you know what? Here, if you do the work, you finish your stuff, then you can draw. So it was, yeah, it was that kind of thing. And I just remember how many worksheets I had all backlogged, and I don't know, they're all cataloged somewhere. I swear I have, and also on top of that, I've lost count of how many sketchbooks I have from like way back when I was a really little kid. But probably like 50 of them at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a thing. Like, I have noticed that most artists have some sort of, I think it's a right brain, left brain thing, where if we are sketching, we actually pay better attention to like someone talking to us. it's easy to, for someone like myself who not only is an artist, but I manage artists now. So, I'll often like lead a team of artists. I'll give a presentation or like, here's the plans for this episode. And I'll see my team, like half of them are sketching while I'm talking to them. And it's easy to think, to be insulted or something and think that they aren't listening. But I know, because I'm an artist, that they're probably listening much more intently because they're drawing. If I could get that out into sort of the public, not like knowledge, especially for like school teachers and stuff. If you have that artist type in your class, they have to draw to focus to listen to you. Or, I don't know if it's across the board that everyone is that way, but don't think they aren't listening. They're actually, it's as though they have to entertain both sides of their brain. It's sort of this weird way that we're wired, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, and I mean, like, I swear to this day there are points where, I myself, will sit in a meeting or something like that, and I will be doodling. But the best part is that so is everybody else, because we're on the same wavelength.
It's definitely like a method of operation, I guess.
Yeah.
So the next question is, so tell us about, how you got your first job out of college, and then we'll get to like talking about that for like the majority of the episode. I am kidding, like, half kidding, but it's fine.
Was this like a current goal?
No, I mean, I love Humongous Entertainment, so I was just gonna be like, let's just like, who cares about Avatar? Let's just talk about Humongous Entertainment.
Yes. So yeah, I mean that's a great way to start it, I guess. Is I went to school in New York, School of Visual Arts, and that was a little bit of a surprise to me. I didn't expect to move to New York, but I had applied to a few colleges that taught animation, and SVA was the school that not only accepted me, but gave me a half scholarship.
Oh, nice.
Which is huge, because I'm totally aware of how much of a burden paying college tuition is on younger people. So, believe me, I was wary of it even then. I didn't come from money. My dad was a mailman. My mom didn't work. So, we weren't rich. So the thought of paying tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for college tuition was super stressful at the time. So the fact that SVA was like, we'll comp half of it for you, I was like, well, I guess I'm moving to New York. I'm so glad that happened. Like, I love New York City. I love that I had that experience, and I consider it sort of a second home. And when I finished at SVA, this is very common in animation colleges. They'll send recruiters because they all sort of want to scout the next new talent. And that was valuable. And then I got a lot of names and numbers, and also tips on like what to put in my portfolio and what type of talent they were looking for. But there is, if any of your listeners have gone to animation school or, remember those days of applying, there's this dark period where you send out your applications and no one calls back for months, if not years. So I moved back home to Tacoma, moved back in with my parents after living in New York for 3 years, and noticed this ad. I think it was in the newspaper. This is very old school. That they were looking for animators in Woodinville, Washington, which is kind of a smaller town, like east of Seattle. And it was odd that I went, because I feel like I had gone to Mordor and back, to like get this animation degree. And yet there was this animation studio, 40, 50 miles north of me. And I applied and found out about Humongous Entertainment. They were working on these CD-ROM traditionally animated video games, which was a thing at the time. You'd go to the store and buy the CD and pop it in your CD drive. And they were like point and click, where you'd like, the character would sort of stand in the middle of the screen and you'd click on stuff and they'd interact with it. And it was very like story driven and very interactive, really ahead of its time, and also beautifully animated. And so they made me do a test. I think it was of Pajama Sam.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of like list was start Pajama Sam in the middle of the screen, and he goes over to I don't remember what it was, like the dresser, and interacts with it in a fun way, and then goes back to his start position. So I did that. I remember it was like 300 drawings or something like that. And, did it for free. And I in-betweened it. And they gave me the job. And I remember feeling like, oh man, maybe it wasn't a horrible idea to go to this animation school. Like I apparently have what it takes to at least get hired. And so for the first gig out of school, I worked at Humongous on Pajama Sam and Putt Putt. Little race
that's
car.
great.
What games did you work on? I know, but like, you tell the people.
Yes. So specifically, I worked on Pajama Sam, Thunder and Lightning Aren't So Frightening, which I think is the second in that series. And then I worked on Putt Putt Enters the Race, which I think might be the third or fourth of the Putt Putt series.
I think fourth, because there's.
I love that you know that.
There's travels through time, and there's the race one.
Putt Putt goes to the circus.
The circus is after, though, because the animation is there's also Goes to the Zoo, which is the first one. I feel like there's and there's like the ones that are like older that aren't like kind of pixel animation, not like kind of 2D, kind of pixel, and that was like Joins the Parade, which I never had, and like Goes to the Moon. So I think it was like the fifth or something. Off the top of my head.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I think Enters the Race, the end goal, like the reward was you could actually enter the race. It was a CG kind of racetrack, which was like really cutting edge at the time.
Yeah, and on top of that, the level of interactivity with Humongous games were just like, to this day, I still think about them constantly, and I was like, man, I could go back and play these and just click on everything, 20 times, and I'll do something different every time. That was at a point where it felt like so many CD-ROM games didn't do that. So it was just, I could tell how much went into it and how much fun it seemed to be to work on those kinds of games, because all the gags and all the little things that you could do for the interactivity, it was kind of just like, go ham. Anything is possible.
It really was. I mean, I kind of took it for granted at the time, because it's like I said, like you'd have Pajama Sam they called it the root position, which is, you'd be standing in the center of the screen, and you'd get this list of prompts, which was, interacts with the fridge, interacts with the oven, interacts with the, etc. And you could do more or less whatever you wanted to, as long as it was playful and interesting and, maybe not too long. So if I wanted to, for example, have him somersault over to the fridge and, take out a Coke and pound it, I could do that. If I wanted to have him hopscotch to the fridge and like fix himself a bowl of cereal, I could do that. So there, it was literally up to the animator, which is much less common in TV animation. You usually get like a storyboard or something that's very like, this is the shot where Aang, specifically picks up his staff and then flies away. So if you go too far off script, so to speak, and have him do a little somersault or like wink at the camera or whatever, that would be discouraged. It would get cut for time. But at Humongous, you were encouraged to be playful, and it's cool to hear that that paid off for like the players, because it really felt like those games were very dense. There was just a lot to do.
There's a lot of replayability to it too, and plus when you had games that had like, even if you looked at stuff like Freddy Fish, where there are sometimes 3 possible endings depending on the story and the things that you did, that there could be 3 different outcomes, kind of Clue style, depending on your choices, or depending on how it's like just the paths you would take, the clues you would find along the way could lead to a different culprit. I think that was like the Hog was that the Hog Rustlers of Briny Gulch?
The Hog Rustlers did that, and then the second one, the ghost in the school or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm like, it's cool when you even had like that kind of like level of, being able to develop something to have multiple endings and multiple paths in a CD-ROM game. That was that, you know, in so many other games at that time, especially if you're looking at from the perspective of there were a lot of educational educational CD-ROM games that were out at the time, like Reader Rabbit and that kind of stuff, Jump Starts. But then you have Humongous that comes in, and it's like there to be fun. It could teach a great moral, but it wasn't trying to be like, we're going to sit you down in a classroom and teach you alphabet. You know, this was like about like critical thinking skills, reading comprehension, and, you know, but doing all of it without feeling like you're being taught. It was
or being forced to, because like I hated like every other game, or the majority of the games were like that weren't Humongous, where it was like actually you had to do math to get the next step, and it's like, I don't want to do math.
It's like Mavis Beacon. You have to type your way to save yourself. It's like, you're a fish. Type as fast as you can all these words before you get eaten by the giant bass.
It's funny when you say it that way, because I hadn't thought about that, but you know, I'm not knocking, you know, learning to type or learning math. You know, obviously those things are important in society to a certain degree. It's a different type of like knowledge to be inquisitive and curious and like poke at things. It's a little bit more the spirit of like young scientists, you know, like when you kind of go like, why do these elements interact with each other this way? I'm going to mix them together and see what it does. You know, it's a much more like curious and less like, you know, 2 + 2 = 4 because of course it does. It's a little more like, I don't know what will happen if you leave those oranges out in the sun for, you know, two weeks versus 3 months. You know, like record it, write it down. You know, it's much more it's a different mindset, but I hadn't thought about that. But, you know, maybe Humongous was really brilliant in that it encouraged that part of learning.
Yeah, it was to me to this day. I still see it as like a trailblazer for how gaming would be designed from that point for kids, especially for kids. Where again, I grew up in that era, and so did KP, of the era of the educational games. But at the same time, we were probably also going to, like, I can at least speak for myself. We would go into a computer lab and we would play these games, or we would have them at home and we would play these games. And so to prepare ourselves for the next year of school. So when you would mentally associate it with, this is school. I mean, it's fun, but it's school. When you had Humongous Entertainment, it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like you were sitting there and being taught something. You again, like you said, it's all about kind of figuring out yourself and being able to have that ability to click on whatever you want, and anything can happen. And that was the cool part, was it so much random stuff. I think it was not long ago, KP was playing Thunder and Lightning on, and it was just the two of us watching it on, because she was like streaming it or screen sharing it on her screen. And we were like clicking through all this stuff. She's like, what do you think I should click on? Like, oh, click on this. And it's just like start clicking on it like 20 times, and like 20 different things, like, you know, 20 different things start popping out of the same object. And like,
yeah, and I remember sharing a room with the animators that did those. I forgot what they were called. They had a name for it. Like, it was something like spot animations or something. And so, you know, a group of us was doing the character animation, which was Pajama Sam, but then the others were like, if you click on the bowl of bananas, then, you know, a little creature pops out of it or whatever. And I think that was even more creative in that they came up with whatever would happen. And the point of it was to keep it, you know, 1 to 3 seconds long. So it was very just, you know, cute and to the point. And it was a very cheerful kind of environment because I think that's what we were doing all day. So I remember we would talk to each other a lot. So, you know, just be like really silly conversations where we were like debating who had the best hummus, you know, while we're drawing this stuff.
Yeah, it made me think of Buzzy too, like the Buzzy at the airport kind of games where you go through all those different parts. That one in particular I had. And I just remember spending hours, literally hours, just clicking on all the different little things. Because then sometimes you click on the escalator and like 10 different people will come down at different times. And somebody's playing a trombone or somebody's doing a cha-cha dance and somebody's doing and they're all doing they're still doing their animation as they're going down the escalator before they disappear out of view. So you could have multiple variations of these like little symbols going on going down this one escalator. And I was just like, I was always fascinated by like how the programming was for that to have like, it's going to play through even with multiple animations going on that same symbol. But yeah,
that's so, yeah, it's really cool. Like have you played Monkey Island?
I know of it. I haven't played it.
Yeah.
Do you know of it, Lauren?
No, I know of it. I haven't played it.
So that's interesting. So we're all in the same boat in that we sort of know of it, but none of us have played it. I heard similar things in that was done really well, and that it was kind of the same idea, but maybe slightly older. Where I felt like Humongous was almost preschool level. Monkey Island was a little more like 6 to 11, or like just slightly. Aged up, but maybe that's our homework, is to go play some Monkey Island.
I mean, I've heard good things about Monkey Island, so I wouldn't be opposed to that. But yeah, and then you can even like compare it to like, I also like I'm a baby as far as like scary movies, but I can handle the scary games and playthroughs of the scariest games because like the people are 3D, so it helps me like separate it. Yeah. So even a lot of the scary games that are like Until Dawn are very like similar, where they're motivated by like what you interact with or what you choose if you want to like have a adult Pajama Sam, if you will. So I think that's like I think it's had a big not a big impact, but like I think it's definitely had an impact about or how people interact with their game media, especially. And I'm like I hope in like my mind somewhere like someone they sell the rights so we can like have a putt like or Pajama Sam TV show or something. That would be, those characters are perfect for it. So
I wonder who has the rights. I mean, I'm assuming it's still the people who founded Humongous Entertainment, but
so Atari bought it, I think, in like early 2000s, and then someone bought it from Atari, and all I know is they put the game they tried to put the games on Wii for a little bit, and that was like weird.
Yeah.
So, and then after that, another company bought it who seems pretty chill with it. Like, they're not doing anything new. They just put them on Steam, and they have like fun little like, they're on Twitter, and they have fun little like graphics for like holidays and things like that, and they have sales, and they're on Humble Bubble. So if you don't know what we're talking about, then you can buy them on Steam, or if you're old school, you can buy the CD-ROMs on eBay or whatever, and then use Scum to play them. Anyway, so I don't think anyone...
They're on iPad too now.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah,
which was fun. Like I played, I think I just did the demo for Thunder and Lightning on my iPad, and it was really crazy. It was kind of like memory lane. I think I remember, I did some of the animation in the opening of that game, so it was part of the demo, and I was like, oh my god, I remember drawing this. It was really weird, I mean, it was cool, but it was weird. Like had I known back when I was drawing on paper that there would be these sort of portable tablets, that I could play this in bed now, so many years later, it was definitely like a weird, I don't know, retrospective kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good idea if we ever do a charity stream, to just like drag you in to and like make you relive all your worst memories. Pajama Sam.
So are you aware of the secret animation I put in that?
I don't think so.
I'll tell you about that.
Okay.
So I've always been a little bit of a I don't want to say, it's not prankster, but a little mischievous, I guess. My sense of humor is a little mischievous. I don't show it, often when I do these like public things, because I try to be professional or whatever. But if you really know me, I like to kind of prank people, and I'm a little more mischievous. So in my downtime, I did this bonus animation on Pajama Sam, because there's this one of the boards, I guess, or rooms in that game is the bathroom. And I was like, how do you click on the bathroom? How do you click on the toilet and not have Pajama Sam like use it? So I did this bonus animation where he actually like takes a dump and he like unfolds the flaps on his pajamas and he like strains and everything. And back in the day, you had to actually go into your PC and like write a little code in one of the secret folders to access this animation. But I think that I talked about it on a podcast or something back in the day, and a number of people now have unlocked it and posted it on YouTube. So you can go and look this up. It's like the Pajama Sam, bonus animation or bathroom animation. Those are like the keywords, but you'll see it. Like, and probably the worst part is he wipes his butt with his cape.
Oh no!
And then very nonchalantly like ties it back around his neck and then goes back to the root position. So it's really gross. I mean, it's not like you don't see a brown stain or anything like that.
No, it's just.
That's just me being me, and it's you can watch it now. It's on YouTube.
That's amazing.
What a legacy, right?
What a legacy.
No, it's like looking back, such humble beginnings.
Exactly. But it's also another one of those like rare, like I could never do that with Aang.
Right.
It would appear like on the Blu-ray. I guess I could do it and then post it online or something, but it would definitely be a little odd. Like, why am I drawing him pooping? But also to my defense, I was pretty young at the time, like 22 or something. So I still sort of had that, sense of humor. I guess I still think it's sort of funny even now.
Oh my god, that's fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up. But yeah, thanks for sharing. I didn't know that. And I was looking up the people that uploaded like the raw files and stuff like that. So, but I still couldn't find that. So now I guess if you listen to the podcast.
Yes, that is your bonus for tuning in.
Okay, we could talk about this all day, but let's move on to Avatar for now. So why don't we start with, so you said you relate most to the airbenders. Why don't you tell us your origin story as far as that?
Yeah, so when people ask me, like, what element are you? They always want to know this. It's a very common question. I feel like in my heart, I feel more like a waterbender, and I think that's because I love snow and rain. Maybe that's the Tacoma in me. Like I get nostalgic when it rains out. Like it's like, ooh, it's cozy, And I love the sound of crunching through snow. And I also sort of relate to the healing properties of waterbending, which is weird. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like the world needs more healing in it or something. That's maybe my sort of esoteric answer. We also on Avatar held like this trivia thing one time. It was like they asked the directors a bunch of questions about like Avatar lore, and this was in the middle of working on the show, so it wasn't as concrete in our minds as it probably is for most fans nowadays. Mm-hmm. So it was like little things like, what's the ultimate form of fire bending? And, you'd have to answer, lightning bending or whatever. And, it was a point-based thing, sort of like a almost like Jeopardy or something that we held in the gym at Nickelodeon. And
oh my god!
The winner of the whole thing would be ordained like the Air Nation or the Air Nomads. And I won the whole thing, so I sort of feel bad because. Well, how do I say this? Since then, we got, designated the corresponding element. So, whoever was sort of first to be eliminated was, I don't remember what it was, fire, I guess. And then second was earth and water was third, or excuse me, I'm confusing. Whatever, I don't remember what they were, but the grand prize was you'd be an airbender like Aang, so I won that. So I feel like, if you're asking me personally, I'm a waterbender, but I also proudly wear my my Air Nomad, championship.
Right. I mean, you've been officially knighted, I guess, but like I just feel bad because like you lose, you get the worst element, fire, or something like that.
Yeah, I can't quite remember how that worked, because I don't think that fire bending in and of itself is the worst. It's arguably the most powerful but you know, in that context, the Firebenders were bad guys, so it was kind of the you know, the least coveted, I guess. But you know, even
valid.
then, people on the team were like, yeah, I got Firebender. They're clearly the better ones, you know.
I guess it's kind of like
you know,
it's like the Hogwarts house
like
argument where some people go because they base it off of the movies and stuff like that, going, oh, I got Slytherin. Oh, no, that's bad. But then it's like, no, there may be some bad eggs in Slytherin, but overall, Slytherin's not a bad house, and their qualities aren't bad. They just happen to have a lot of bad eggs in their basket.
Totally, it's totally a Slytherin thing.
Mm-hmm. So it's just like, it's kind of like that, where to be a firebender, no, it's not a bad thing to be a firebender. It just so happened that there were some bad people associated with firebending.
Yeah, and I guess what was cool about Korra is you got to see, you know, the other side of that, where like not all firebenders are you know, horrible people. Mm-hmm. I mean, arguably you see that with Zuko too, but
yeah,
just took him a while.
Spoiler alert, right?
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I'm messing with you. I imagine anyone who's watching this, like, what, the show's been up for, like, what, 15 years? Like, you've probably seen it.
Well, the crazy thing about that, I assumed that as well, but the fact that Netflix added it back to their queue in summer of 2020, there was a ton of first-time watchers, which was really crazy. Like, I had assumed that sort of the Avatar fan base was all about 30 now, you know, or, you know, like pushing 30, because, you know, that show came out 12, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. But there's this new generation now that just watched it for the first time. So you know, I'm thankful for that. It also makes me realize I have to be careful that I don't, you know, tell too many like dirty jokes or something about the Avatar world, because there's still like 8-year-olds that are like, I suppose they aren't on Twitter, but you know, there's a new generation that's discovering it. So I guess it's cool, you know.
Mm-hmm. You don't want to corrupt the youths or whatever the kids are into.
Yeah. There's a responsibility there.
So let's backtrack a little bit. So how did you get that job, and then we can like go into like what you actually did on the show, because I don't think people really think a lot about like an animation director and like what that is.
Yeah, those are great questions. Short of it is, I was working on King of the Hill for a while. I was on that show for like 6 years or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that show went forever.
One of the directors on that show was Mike DiMartino, and his assistant director was Brian Konietzko.
Oh,
and
the boys.
You know, I suppose like the hardcore Avatar fan would like include their King of the Hill episodes as like part of their library of work. But the good thing is, you know, in any animation team, you kind of move the artists around. So I got to do, I believe, character layout for them, and they possibly storyboarding, I can't remember, but they liked my work and they remembered me. So when they left King of the Hill to do their big fancy development deal at Nickelodeon and work on this secret show, they got greenlit and had to hire 4 directors. And so they remembered their friends who were really good from King of the Hill. That was literally what it boiled down to. Wow. So that included Dave Filoni, who is now, you know, co-runner of The Mandalorian, which is crazy. And Lauren McMullen, who was really just a awesome like Simpsons director, and she had moved on to King of the Hill, so she joined us. Anthony Leoy, who was one of the, you know, star directors on King of the Hill, and myself, and I was the only of those 4. Actually, I take that back. Dave and I were the first time directors on Avatar.
Wow!
And so we got hired to, you know, help build the world, and so it was a crazy. I've said this in other interviews. Like, learning to direct for the first time is a challenge in and of itself. But learning to direct on Avatar is like next level, because was a really challenging show. So it was definitely a very steep learning curve. The directing on that show was, if I could simplify it, it's basically this: you would get handed a script that was more or less written without your knowledge. So I think a lot of people sometimes confuse that. They think that maybe I co-wrote my episodes, and for the most part I didn't. you just get assigned a script, and you're part of the director rotation. So I would do every 4th episode, and later every 3rd when we sort of pared down to 3 directors. And I'd have a team of storyboard artists, which was 2 or 3 board artists. And we would divide the episode into thirds or quarters and say, all right, you get pages 1 through 8, you get pages 9 through 16, et cetera, et cetera. So the board artists would go off and do their assignment. I would do mine. And the difference as a director is that I could note their work. So I'd be like, you're maybe missing a shot of this, or wouldn't it be cool if you added this? And it also includes some of the more annoying notes like, your perspective's a little wrong, or Zuko's off model, you know. And then we would collectively present to Mike and Brian, who would note all of our work. So I'd get notes on my stuff, you know, all the directors. And those notes were often like just making the whole thing cohesive, making sure that it was like, now remember, Zuko is doing this in the next episode, so we want to foreshadow it in yours. You know, so they had much like larger understanding of where the series was going. But it would also include your perspective is wrong and Zuko's off model. You know, like who knows that better than Mike and Brian? So we'd get a lot of like, you know, push the composition or you know, basically fancy words for draw it better.
Yeah, I'm surprised because, like, it seems like, from what I can tell, like, being on model on boards is dependent on the show and dependent on, like, where you're shipping the episode to. So, you know, a lot of times for our stuff, it's, like, we try to keep it on model, especially, like, when, you know, the animators are having their scenes underneath and trying to kind of patch along the timing and all that stuff. But, you know, other times, like, I've seen board shows, and even Pony, like, was very dependent on the storyboarder and didn't have to be on model because it was puppet based or like on the boards. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, are you on Pony? Did I not know this?
No. Oh, okay. Back. So I'm a YouTuber, but we also do independent animation. So it's all fan stuff. But,
oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's how I met Andrew. Is I would be booked for the Pony conventions as a community guest, like so versus the people who were on the show.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask because I just didn't want to be, you know, assuming anything. Because like, if you are in the industry, then you know, there's a little bit more of a, you know, how this happens. But I suppose also for our you know listeners, they don't necessarily know all this, so. It's not necessarily the worst that I'm over-explaining things. I guess.
Yeah. I mean, like the podcast itself is all about introducing people, and like the thing that you know, is been hard for me personally is kind of not being in a place where you could kind of, you know, foster your animation skills. And you know, like I was, you know, on the East Coast and I just moved, and I have like a film degree, so I've had to kind of get all these skills like post college and via the guild and stuff like that. So it's a lot of it's just like letting people learn what they need to learn so they know like how to, you know, get from point A to point B, like maybe without an art degree. And like that's the thing. And especially with COVID, you know, like it makes more of the business model applicable, I guess, depending on where you are. So
yeah, I mean, I really kind of love and respect that route. I think it's becoming more and more viable. Like I did the very traditional route, which is you go to school, you get a degree, you apply for jobs, and you work your way up in the system. But more and more I'm seeing like, especially if you can learn animation by following other people who do animation or watching even YouTube videos. There's a ton of like tutorials on YouTube. You can totally do it without a degree. Like I almost feel, you know, I don't know if the universities would be mad for saying this, but it's really optional nowadays. Like you can figure it out on your own. And there's some very good peers that I work with that never went to college. They just sort of learned on their own and then figured it out on the job.
Yeah, it's a whole new frontier now, and especially in the wake of COVID, it seems to have, it seemed to expand a lot of different opportunities in that way because it no longer was there like the physical distance relocation aspect so much. Yeah. Because as long as you had the tools or the tools were provided, You could pretty much do it from anywhere. So when people are, they're stuck at home, as long as they have that means, they can do it. And yeah, it's crazy to think how much changed all within pretty much just shy of a year's time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like a lot of my friends like up and moved to Vermont or something like that, just for now, because they're like, I can still totally run this TV show from anywhere in the world, and I'm just, let's just do it over here for now.
It's just time zone difference. That's really more or less the primary hurdle, I guess.
Yep, totally. But I guess sort of back to your point, which is drawing characters on model. There's definitely a school of thought, which is, and this is very TV animation kind of approach, which is if you draw the characters on model in the storyboard, then there's less of a chance that the overseas studio will screw it up.
Yeah.
That's sort of one school of thought. So I've seen like Family Guy boards, for example, they have literally created brush stamps that is like Peter Griffin's like head, and they just like stamp it on the model so that it's like ready to go, and then they just tweak his expression so that they can pump out the boards really fast and precisely. So that's one camp. But then there's this other camp that is, no, that's the whole point of the animator's job, is to put the characters on model, and storyboards should be rough, and you're more just blocking out cinematography and posing and acting, and trust the animators. And the fun thing about Avatar was we skewed more towards that, where it was just trust the animators. And what I liked about that is we could draw lots of poses. So I think the animator in me liked that, so those very elaborate like kung fu scenes where you had to really pose it out and make it super precise. We could do that, but I also didn't have to worry so much about drawing all of the cuts and details on Zuko's armor, for example. It was assumed that the animators would do that. So, if I rarely do this, but if I post storyboards from Avatar, you'll see they're not very beautiful drawings. They're pretty raw and loose, but if you flip them or sort of step through them quickly, hopefully they animate well, and it looks a lot like the finished product in terms of just the movement and stuff like that.
That makes sense. This is a little sidetracking, but how did you guys figure out how to board the fight scenes? Because I know those are particularly hard, and I know there was a martial arts professional guy that helped kind of block out the movement and do tests and stuff like that. But I was just curious, from your perspective.
Yeah, it was definitely a intricate, multi-stepped process, and I suppose I should give this shout out. Entertainment Insider just did a video on this that they posted on YouTube and Twitter, featuring Sifu Kisu, who is like the martial artist expert on Avatar, and Korra. That sort of shows you how we did that, but I can also explain again for those of you who don't feel like looking it up. We'd start with sort of rough storyboards, where Aang might do he does air bending, and it calls for it in the script. So I'd just sort of have him shoot his hands out and air would come out. And then at a certain phase, when the boards were loosely blocked out, we'd bring in Kisu and we'd show him the drawings. And then we'd say all right, this is the bit where Aang blasts some air, but he's standing on a boat that's kind of rocking, for example. So maybe he's slightly off balance. What would that look like? And the great thing about Kisu is that he's that great balance of knowledgeable and also playful, that he'd be like, well, if you're off balance, then maybe you might do this. And he'd sort of act it out, and he'd stand on one leg and, pretend that he's off balance. And then do the kung fu based, interpretation of what we did, so that it would actually have that weight to it and physics to it and authenticity to it. And so then we would go back to the board, and we'd film him doing this, go back to the boards, and a lot of people asked us if we would rotoscope it. We didn't quite do that because rotoscoping literally means you traced the video, but we would reference it. So we would have it on the side and try to draw the poses that he did. And then the boards would get updated with this kung fu accurate posing. Then we would do a third pass where in some cases, like shots would get cut or shots would get added, or maybe we'd go, now that we know the kung fu movement is this, wouldn't it look a lot better if we dropped the camera down to the ground or shot it from high up above? And that's where it would get much more storyboard specific, where we would stand on a chair or stand on the bleachers in the Nickelodeon gym, so that we could actually get as accurate a down shot as we could. And Kisu would film it again. So it was several steps to get it just right. And what we found was it was a burden to the animators if we sent them like 8 hours of footage, just kind of go through this and find the kung fu reference. It was much better to be like, this is shot 80 and here is the reference for shot 80 of Kisu doing it in the exact camera angle of shot 80. And we figured that out over several episodes, but that was like the package we would ship with the animation to get it as accurately as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm not sure if the majority of like action shows do that route, or they kind of let the storyboarders have at it and kind of plan it from their imagination. I imagine Kim Possible, for instance, did that, because like there was a lot of kung fu, but I don't think it was a lot of specific stylizing from what I could tell. So,
and I feel like that's a little bit more animation industry norm, and I don't knock it because I've been there before. On Clone Wars, for example, we didn't have a kung fu instructor. There were times when I wish we did, because there's a lot of intricate lightsaber fighting in that show.
Yeah.
So we would sort of just make it up. And I think that in some cases it looked fine. In others, it sort of just looked like a little kid waving a stick around, really fast. And it's hard to do, like, especially that type of thing. Like you just, want to make sure that it at least looks believable, but animation deadlines are a bitch. So you want to try to hit your deadlines, and sometimes just like, close enough. I will fake this, and that's what like Naruto or like Dragon Ball Z does a lot of, where it's drawn really well, but it's kind of like, you get it. He's kung fuing. I just want to hit my deadline and move on to the next shot.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I was just curious, but okay, so let's branch out from there. I'm sure all the avatars are excited about this, and will badger us to get you back on. But anyway, that's enough Avatar for now. So how did you go from Avatar for your you talked about Clone Wars, and then we can talk about Dragon Prince. So how did you kind of branch out after Avatar kind of wrapped?
Yeah, so when Avatar wrapped, it was sort of this sad time, because it was a fun show. It was a challenging show, but it was always intended to end at season 3. There's a lot of rumors that there was a season 4 that they canceled because of the M. Night Shyamalan movie. That's not really true. The whole point of it was that Aang was going to confront the Fire Lord and defeat him, and it would be the end. They had speculated about a season 4. They were like, what would that look like? But I think Mike and Brian were fried. It was a challenging show, and they really wanted to sort of tie it up with a tidy bow and move on. Mm-hmm. But that also meant that most of the crew needed a job now. But the really lucky thing for me was I was buddies with Dave Filoni, and he left after season 1 because George Lucas hired him to do a Clone Wars sort of reboot. Mm-hmm. There was a Genndy Tartakovsky like micro series that was amazing, and I think that he really did an incredible job on that. Mm-hmm. But George wanted to turn it into a full-fledged series, and wanted to do it in CG because he's always kind of a tech junkie. George loves his next level technology. That's
if him going back into the originals and doing the CG, aliens and stuff like that, and then effects. If that tells you anything.
Yeah, that's him. So he wanted to do that, and he hired Dave. So Dave, unfortunately, left us after season 1.
I mean, that's a pretty good reason, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, like, how can you blame him?
Yeah.
And so the cool thing was Dave and I were chatting, and I was like, dude, Avatar is wrapping, in the summer of, I think it was 2007. I need a job. Like, is there still a spot for me? And it just so happened that there was. Like, I think they were entertaining the idea of adding a 4th director because Clone Wars had 3. And it just worked out. So they put me up. It was very fancy. I feel like this is one of those things that you dream of joining the animation industry. It's not always this luxurious, but they put me up in this apartment in like Japantown in San Francisco, and I drove into Skywalker Ranch every day to like work on Star Wars with George Lucas. And I was brought on as a guest director, so it was sort of like a test, I guess, to see like if I liked it, if I liked living in the Bay Area, and also if George liked my work. If Dave liked my work too.
No pressure.
If I could do it, because it wasn't a CG. I was not a CG director, so I had to sort of learn that on the job. And it ended up that it went well, and so they wanted to bring me on full time. So suddenly, in like January of 2008. We put our house on the market, in LA, and moved, and up and moved to the Bay Area for 3 years, and I got to make Star Wars with like my buddy Dave and with George Lucas, sort of like Dave to my left and George to my right.
Oh God, I feel like if you were not as leveled, you just like use that as your your bragging card and just like no big deal. I just was at Skywalker Ranch and hung out with my friend Georgie. That's
yeah, I mean, it was definitely weird. I don't like to name drop sort of in general, but there's times where I'm like, it is a pretty cool story. And I feel like people like to hear that now and then. And I think, also it's something to aspire to. Like, you will, at some point, if you join this industry, work with some of your heroes. Maybe not all of them, it's not guaranteed. And in some cases, you'll work with them and find out that they're assholes.
Or they get me too'd or whatever.
Fortunately, with George, I think, he was kind of a shy dude, but for the most part, very nice. He never, ever yelled at us. I think also it goes to say that he's a big philanthropist. Like, he has donated countless money to, like, schools and getting them like iPads and the disenfranchised. He doesn't like brag about it. It's not like Lucasfilm goes, we're proud to say we donated millions of dollars to this cause. He just does it privately, and so he's a good person. He's done a lot with his success. So I think it's good to sort of see that firsthand.
Yeah, I think the closest I ever came to ever being near him in person was purely by, I didn't even expect it. It was because I went to Loyola Marymount and studied animation there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And
Jay Oliva?
Huh?
Was Jay Oliva one of your teachers?
Yes, he was.
Yeah,
and
I know Jay.
Yeah, and I remember it was freshman orientation. And we were sitting in the gym there, and it was just funny. I realized after the fact that, because I'm sitting in a row, and then a few rows ahead of me, I see this very distinct, salt and pepper pompadour, the checkered shirt, the glasses, the same profile, and I'm sitting there going, that George Lucas? And
he's got such a look.
Yes,
like
he's unmistakable. Look. So I'm just like, either that's somebody who looks remarkably like him in every single way, or that is 100% George Lucas. And as it turned out, I guess his son was, I think he was in production or screenwriting or something like that. He was in one of the other film school majors. But what's kind of funny is that despite the size of the school, with animation and production, they all took their separate classes, right? So it was kind of funny that often you wouldn't cross paths with other production majors or stuff like that. Animation, we kind of lived in a lab, right? So, but so I was just like, I didn't really, even if I ran into his son, I wouldn't have known because it was very quiet about it. But
that's so funny.
But I'm just I guess that was my only hint at him being there.
That's amazing. And you forget about that. Like at the end of the day, he is a dad, and he wants his or I suppose his son wanted to be in the industry. So it's like, all right, let's find you a good school. And I believe he's working in the industry now, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine, right?
he might even be working on Mandalorian. I'm not, but I remember he used to hang out in sort of the editing room now and then, and he was a teenager at the time, so it was interesting because he was very teenagery, like a little kind of like distracted on his phone, while we're like making Star Wars. Like he seemed to like not be as impressed with it, because it was just his dad. He was hanging out at dad's office, I guess, but to his defense, he was a teenager at the time, so. But I'm glad to hear that he's, in the business. Yeah.
It was just, I thought that was just really funny that of all the times to see him, it was just, I guess it's kind of like that one clip of him showing up randomly in a documentary while this guy's like walking down the street talking about some other entirely different process, about like some technical process about things. And then all of a sudden George Lucas just shows up out of the blue in the background and just walks into a hotel and was like, oh.
Yes, I saw that like not that long ago, a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
It was so funny.
Like
There's
same
also
energy.
Another one. I'm not sure if this is real. I think it is, where he's like sitting on a park bench at Disney World and almost like kind of taking a power nap, like he's got his eyes closed, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And I don't blame him. Like he's like, I've been walking all day. I need to just like recharge for a second.
That's amazing.
I mean, but and this is kind of the fun part about like having a podcast, is you kind of get to hear these stories where people like you wouldn't even think about like cross paths, and you're just like, oh really, like the unicorn is real after all.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's definitely weird because like even when I see like old documentaries when he was a lot younger and working on Star Wars, or even the movies before Star Wars, it's weird to think like, oh, like I kind of know that dude. Like, it's not like we text each other every weekend or anything, but I worked with him. He's an old boss. Actually, I guess I should say this. This is there's a line in the original Star Wars where Luke Skywalker asks Ben Kenobi like, you fought in the Clone Wars? And at the time, it was sort of a throwaway line because it was, I don't know what the hell is the Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. But now when I hear that line, it's like, yep, so did I. It's a little bit like, you fought in Nam or something. Like I feel it on a different level now.
Oh Lord, oh that's great. And I'm pleased with how. I mean, I'm kind of casual with Star Wars, even though my dog is named Chewbacca. But I'm pleasantly surprised because I know people were really passionate about that show, and I'm glad it got a good rap when Disney Plus got a hold of it, and
Yeah, and that was a little bit of there was a dark time when I'm not sure if I should be saying this on a podcast, so I'll watch my words. But when Disney bought out Star Wars, the end result was that Clone Wars got canceled, and part of it was all business, because Clone Wars was kind of a Cartoon Network property, and Disney is their competitors. I think it had something to do with that. Like, now that we own you, we're not letting you have this valuable property anymore. But the fact that it came full circle, that they actually finished the seasons and now it lives on Disney Plus, is sort of the happy ending that I think the show deserved. So I'm glad that they kind of righted the temporary like bad part of that deal, I guess.
And yeah, like hit or miss, like Disney is pretty good for the most part with finding like hearing people be vocal about that kind of stuff, and they're pretty good about keeping their own legacy alive, which is something I've talked about with my analysis work and all that stuff. So I'm glad it worked out, because I know people like were really into that show, and I especially now that like Rebels came out and the Resistance came out, and now Mandalorian is using Ahsoka. I think that people who are listening to the podcast. So
yeah, I mean it's I'll give them that. Like that's one of the things they do incredibly well is keep their characters and their movies in the public eye for decades. So we'll probably hear a lot more Star Wars in the future, but I have to admit it is really cool to see Ahsoka, because like at the time, I remember when I was coming on to Clone Wars, Dave was explaining me the concept of the show, and it was like there's this little known fact that Darth Vader, before he turned bad when he was Anakin Skywalker, actually had a Padawan, and she was this kind of opinionated teenager, there was a little bit of a what? It sounded so weird at the time.
Sounds like, fan-fiction-y,
What's that?
It sounds kind of fan-fiction-y.
It does sound fan-fiction-y, but now, after working on the show, I kind of accept it. And there's times when I'm watching the old movies and I think it's sort of weird to think that dude once trained Ahsoka Tano.
Yeah.
But now that she's actually in Mandalorian and we're starting to fill in those blanks, it's becoming more and more like, this is totally canonical or canon. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm really hoping, and I don't say this as, an official statement. I want to be clear that it's not like Dave told me this and now I'm passing this info to you.
Yeah.
Merely a observation. But with an Obi-Wan series coming and an Ahsoka series coming, I'm assuming we're going to fill in a lot of those spaces. So it's really exciting. It sort of makes the that whole Clone Wars run like much more valid, I guess, in my mind, and I suppose in the fans.
Yeah. I'm like, again, I'm pretty casual with Star Wars, but I am
sure
so totally excited with Obi-Wan, and I'm just, because Obi-Wan's like the best, and he has the best memes, so
Yeah.
Never forget the photos of Jesus, and it's actually just you and McGregor.
Yes. Yeah, totally. There's actually, my aunt has these little like tchotchkes on her like fireplace, I guess, that I think is supposed to be, it's like Saint Joseph or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then there was this other little, like, it was almost like an egg or something next to it. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was like a really ornate white and blue egg. And I was teasing her that it was Obi-Wan and R2-D2. Because it just, like, if you squint, it basically was them.
Oh my God, that's great. Okay, we have one, like a couple, well, oh no, I got disconnected from Skype.
Oh, did she cut out?
Give me a second.
Looks like we lost Rachel.
Oh no. Editor, don't worry, we'll fix this right now.
God damn it.
I guess I'll just leave it recording though.
Yeah. No, definitely keep recording. The show must go on. I guess what we could talk about was for now is what were some of your biggest takeaways from, especially when you had all these experiences where you had multiple roles and were wearing a lot of hats in a lot of these respects. You feel like that was like a lot of those experiences you were able to take with you on each new project that you got to go on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's one of those things that it just sort of happens in life in general, especially in your career where you learn things in one job and you apply them to the next. And you also learn, there's also bad working habits that I've seen on previous jobs that I'm like, I will not do
Okay,
that.
can you guys hear me?
Going forward. Hello.
Hi, yeah, Skype, I told Lauren via Discord, which is the other chat service, but I could have texted her or whatever, but Skype crashed on me, so that was fun.
Yes. Is it helpful? Do we do another countdown, for
Oh, no,
for
we
syncing?
can just kind of, like, pick off, and I'll, like, re-ask the question, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I was just asking him about what some of the biggest takeaways he had from, like, being able to be versatile, wearing a lot of hats in his roles, and what he was able to take with him to each.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the good thing is having worked in traditional animation as well as CG, and then having done comedy as well as action, it starts to just make like my toolkit really, really big, I guess, or sort of. Yeah. So what I like about that is there's a certain level of like job security that comes with that. So for example, if there was a new sitcom coming out that's along the lines of Simpsons or Family Guy or something, I'm technically qualified to do that because I worked on King of the Hill in the same way that I'm qualified to do an action show. But what I like to do is I actually like to mix genres. So there are moments in Avatar, for example, where I'm doing some of my King of the Hill comedy shtick, and some of those like tricks that I learned from working on that show. Or when I'm working on Star versus the Forces of Evil, implementing some of my Avatar action knowledge to like boost the action scenes in that show. So I kind of like doing that, like crossing skill sets. I think that it's one of those things that just makes it a richer experience. And, also as I'm getting older, getting more writing under my belt and more, dabbling in character design, which I barely do, just makes me feel like if you can do a little bit of everything, it's really powerful. But also when I'm managing people, I'm not speaking out of turn, I guess, like make it look better. There's a little more like, I think that this could look better if you work on these 3 things that you can do before 3:00 this afternoon. And, as opposed to, giving vague instruction, I guess.
Press the animation button.
Yes, pressing the animation button.
Yeah, I'm sometimes I'm a little bit too vague when I'm directing my own stuff, so I get yelled at by my board artists. But I'm trying to, it's a learning process, I guess.
It's definitely a challenge, and that's a whole skill into itself of being able to describe very precisely what is not working, and it could be better if you do this, because a lot of times I'm realizing I used to fear with artists that if I gave too hyper precise instruction, they would be frustrated because they want to just do their own thing. But I found that they like the freedom at first, but then when it's due and they just kind of want to turn it in and move on to their next assignment, they want the most precise direction you can give them. And I, because at that point it's just like, look, just tell me what you want so that I can finish this and go home.
Yeah.
so I that's been a trick that's worked well with me. Hopefully that's helpful, is like you can be a little looser with the reins up front, and then they get tighter as the deadline comes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that, and that's kind of the thing. I mean, Lauren can attest to it. I kind of just let people do what they want because I run a volunteer team, so it's about like making sure people are getting the experience out of it that they want to.
Right.
But I think it's also, same thing with COVID. People just want to have access to places where they can practice animation, or there, things where they can get better. Especially if you're not in a place to enter the industry yet. It all depends on like, what you can do. And, I think that's kind of the fun part because like, sometimes you kind of create this balance of people that just are happy doing what they want to do. And, you can contribute. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling on at this point. So,
it's a thing, and also people have different personalities too, which is tricky. It's a little bit like puppies or something. Like there's really playful ones, and then really kind of standoffish ones, and skittish puppies and or animators. So you have to kind of like, be aware of that too. Like sometimes there's a lot of people in animation that are incredibly shy and quiet. And that can sometimes feel like they're unhappy or uninterested or not paying attention. In some cases, that's the case, but a lot of times they're totally happy to be there, but it's just their personality. There's also really conceited, people that can't stop talking about themselves, which I suppose is me a little bit on this podcast, but I guess that's why I'm here.
You're on a podcast. Don't worry, it's socially acceptable.
And imagine like managing a mix of those while you're like trying to hit a deadline. So it's like trying to get the guy who talks too much to turn it off a little bit so that you can hear what the quiet person is thinking, and doing incredibly accurate kung fu with a wide angle lens and it's due Friday. Like, it can be really like challenging.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, I'm not in your professional shoes, really. I'm just kind of an amateur, but I get what you're saying as far as just kind of like herding the cats and making sure they all get along, and every kid.
and especially what you do, because you're turning in finished animation. To a certain degree, I'll do, for example, storyboards or something, and then pass it off to animators who are much more capable than me, and lighters and et cetera, that will make it look really polished. Mm-hmm. So I can pass the buck at a certain point. But when you're working in an independent capacity, everything is sort of your responsibility. So, that's extra challenging. Like you're the person who goes, this is good enough. I'm signing off on it. It is now like, internet ready.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, but as well as there's not as much pressure, because like if something is off model for a frame, like, I don't have a studio like who's going to run down my throat, saying like, it's just kind of doing a project that makes everyone feel like it's in a professional capacity, which is still kind of challenging, but I think it's a lot of it just in my head as far as like, this has to be perfect, just I'm a good artist. So, And
I feel like that doesn't go away whether you're working for a studio or you're working by yourself. Like it's, that's that artist pride thing.
Yeah. But, I think, that like a little segue, but I think that's kind of helped like just have the channel stand out on its own, because like we're doing a little bit of everything, and we're just like also like getting stuff done, which is a thing that like a lot of fan produced media has a problem with. They always, like, a lot of people just have these grand ideas and they have these great fan fictions who are like, and maybe the stories are great, but like the execution they just don't know how to manage and understand. And not that I've been the best at it, but
we made a trailer and the trailer looks really good, and then the project never happens.
That's always what happened.
That's a thing. I mean, there's a case you could make that sometimes a really awesome trailer will get you, Netflix will call you and be like, do you have a show pitch attached to this? Sometimes that can happen, but I'm also really guilty of, like, I'm always planning some elaborate 80-volume graphic novel in my head, and it's too much pressure to put on any person. So there's an art to like just do like a 30-page one, or do an 8-page one or something that feels like it has a beginning, middle, and end, and you can actually finish it and put it out there and see how people feel about it. So there's a lot to be said about like a smaller scope goal for sure.
Good advice. Good podcast so far. So I was gonna see how your earlier experience, so King of the Hill and Avatar, and how that kind of reigned into Star Versus and Dragon Prince, because those are very different genre kind of shows. I mean, Star does they both do a little bit of everything, but at the same time, like, one's mostly comedy driven and one is very like Avatar-esque, if you want to call it, and they have like the Sokka VA. So I was just kind of curious how like the career has kind of went along. I don't know, how it's all kind of worked out.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where every gig sort of leads to the next one. So, as I mentioned earlier, like, because I knew Mike and Brian from King of the Hill, I went to Avatar. Because I knew Dave Filoni from Avatar, I went to Clone Wars. My work on Clone Wars got me the gig for Green Lantern. So, a lot of these jobs kind of flow into the next one.
It's like a spider web.
Yeah. Star was an interesting one in that it was this rare time in the business where I watched the pilot episode on TV with my wife. And so we're both animation fans enough that we will sometimes check out the first episode of everything just because we want to get that sampler. And we really liked the pilot episode. And I was like, is it me? Is this really funny? And she's like, me too. I really liked it. And then somehow within a month, I got asked to work on it.
Wow.
And the way that it happened was Star came out, and I think that the pilot had tested well or it did well or something. So Disney believed they had a potential hit on their hands. So they greenlit a season 2. And they needed to staff up because what can unfortunately happen in this industry sometimes is you finish season 1 and then everyone gets laid off. And then you get a season 2 and now you have to rehire everyone, but you can't because they're already working on their next gig. So you have to replace people. So I was one of those replacement directors. And I interviewed with Darren, who was the show creator, and just kind of like vibed well. Like we seemed to sort of like each other's sense of humor. And I genuinely told her, like, I really like the pilot. Like, I think you've got something really good here. And it looks like a fun gig for me. But I have to warn you that I've never worked on a show this wacky before. So I'm a little worried that it might not be a good fit. But I would like to try to do something like this. And she believed that I could pull it off. So she brought me on, and it was definitely a fun challenge on that show because Star is board driven, which not, everyone, I suppose, knows what that is. But as opposed to getting a script assigned to you and then executing the script very faithfully, you get an outline, which is a much looser sketch of what the episode is. And then the board artist actually writes the dialogue as well as storyboards it. And so I loved that challenge because I rarely got a chance to do that in the past. To some degree, I did it on Green Lantern because I was show running it. But this was, it felt more like making those storybooks and comics that I talked about, in second grade, where you come up with everything. And so that was a really fun experience. But then in the middle of it, this curveball that happened was some friends of mine were forming a animation studio video game company called Wonderstorm. And they called me and said, we really want to launch this TV show, like our flagship TV show called The Dragon Prince. And we need a seasoned animator who has showrun before and managed teams and done CG. Will you join us? And it put me in this really awkward place because I was actually really happy on Star, and I actually really liked working at Disney. Like Disney's a very fun place to work in that there's always like cupcake parties and mariachi bands, and it's one of those places. So I was like, I don't really want to leave, but they kind of dangled that carrot that I couldn't refuse. So I left my job at Disney to go help on Dragon Prince, and suddenly I was doing that for a number of years.
Yeah, and Dragon Prince, I really like it so far. So I mean, Lauren, have you seen Dragon Prince? Have you seen like bits and stuff?
I've seen bits. I haven't watched full season yet, but I've been trying to make my way over to that. There's so much I still have to catch up on. There's so much being produced these days.
That is a mood. I mean, I'll spoil it. Go ahead.
Oh no, you can.
Okay, a slight spoiler if you haven't seen like season 2 with Dragon Prince, but I thought it was like relatively refreshing that you guys paired the couple up like before the show ended, which doesn't happen that often. Like I understand that it's like an arc beat that wraps up the story, but I think people weren't really expecting that to happen. They just kind of assumed it would happen at the last episode, like it always does. So
it's weird. I mean, I'm realizing I'm not sure why we do this as storytellers, and I think that people have been vocal about this online, so it's making me question it. But oftentimes the the romantic sort of hookup, I guess, the when they finally like confess their love for each other or whatever, is played as the reward, at the end of a long journey. So you get that like last scene kiss between, whoever. But it doesn't always have to play that way. I mean, I guess we sort of did that with Sokka and Suki in Avatar, where they kind of became an item somewhere in the middle of season 3, I believe, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember when that happened. And it was actually kind of nice to see them hang out as, good, compatible, boyfriend and girlfriend. And, it wasn't a big story point that they fought a lot or anything like that. They just, they made a good couple. And there's less of that in storytelling. And it's not just animation, it's live action as well. And so it made me think like, oh, it's not necessarily the worst thing to have a couple find each other in episode 4 and they just sort of go off on their adventures together. So it doesn't really make me question like how we're approaching romance, I guess. Like it's not the worst thing to do it earlier, I guess.
Yeah, I think like I'm kind of split because I don't know if you know Kim Possible history, but essentially Kim and Ron were supposed to be paired up at the end of the show, and then the show got renewed without anyone realizing it, and they're just like, oh, now what? So, and it's like, it also presents a new, like, a new plethora of like, plot options, I guess, but also not making a bit too big of a deal about it, too. So, I think, I think, you can see either side, I guess. But I don't know. I thought it was just refreshing because, like, especially, like, for animation, when it's kind of harder to tell how many more seasons you're going to get renewed for, how much, like, not that live action shows don't have this problem, too, but, like, usually they're cheaper, so it's a little bit easier to predict. But from my understanding, anyway. But, yeah, I just, it was just relatively refreshing that I'm just like, oh, okay, we don't have to go through all this won't they BS like for the whole show, 5 seasons. It can get kind of taxing. So
it's definitely a tricky curveball when a show ends prematurely or when a show gets extended unexpectedly. Because what we're all trying to do, at least me anyway, I suppose I can't speak for everyone, but I like to tell a complete story where it's like once upon a time there was a character and they wanted to do a thing and this was in their way, but after a long journey they pulled it off and lived happily ever after. But then another thing happened and they had to, like suddenly when you have to like, but then some other thing happened, that can feel awkward because it's like, but I thought we got the happy ending. Why is there another thing? And that's usually because you had a hit show and the network or the studio said, we want to order more of these. So that can feel clumsy in storytelling. The other extreme, though, is once upon a time there was a character and he really wanted a thing and this thing got in his way. And it just stops there because you got canceled. And that happened on Green Lantern, where we had I can't math right now, a 52 episode arc planned, and we got cut off in the middle. So, to this day, people message me on Twitter and say, when are you making more of that show? And it's hard to explain that it's not really up to me. But that show basically ends in the midpoint of a larger, like imagine if you're watching Avatar and Appa got kidnapped and the show ended. Like that's what happened on Green Lantern. Very like painful memory. Like I just got interrupted.
Oh, that's always like horrible. Oh, is that because of like the Ryan
Ryan Reynolds?
Yeah, the Ryan Reynolds movie failed.
I think so, and I don't mean to blame him directly, but it's weird that from like behind the scenes, Warner Brothers was, they had a Batman movie under their belt, and I think Superman was in development, and they were like, who's next? How about Green Lantern? And so there was all this hype about making Green Lantern the next big character in their lineup. And so there was the Ryan Reynolds movie. There was a straight-to-video animated thing called, I think, Emerald Knights. There was a video game that was on like PlayStation and Xbox. And then there was an animated series, which is the one that I did. So they were really leaning into this Green Lantern thing. And so when the movie came out and didn't do well, never mind whether it was good or not. It's just the fact that people didn't really show up and pay money to watch it.
Right.
Suddenly, Warner Brothers was just like, abandon ship.
We gotta burn all this stuff now.
Yeah, where even the color green was almost an ugly word around the studio. Like they suddenly just did not. They were just like, move on. Let's do Wonder Woman instead, or whatever their solution was. And so suddenly, I remember this distinctly. There was a point at the middle of Green Lantern where it felt like we weren't getting executive notes anymore because they just thought of it as a lost cause. And it was a blessing and a curse because now we weren't getting the overthinking, nervous notes that can sometimes happen from like the higher ups. They just sort of vanished. So we did whatever we wanted. And the show got dark and intense in ways that we wanted. And it got really romantic and shippy in ways that we wanted. And there was no pushback because it was sort of off their radar. So it was this beautiful like heyday for a bit where we were doing whatever we wanted. And the fans seemed to be really responding well to it. And then we started planning sort of the next order, like the next 26 episodes. And that's when my boss came in and delivered the bad news that there would not be more. And we probably should start job hunting.
It's like record scratch. Party's over.
It's total record scratch. I mean, for the record, I suppose I kind of feel like confessing this. I cried when that happened. Like it's devastating. It's a little bit like losing a loved one or like losing a pet or something, and it sounds silly, when you say that because it's just cartoons, but like you invest so much into getting these things off the ground. And when it suddenly is ripped out from under you, it's devastating, and so think about that when you think of, sometimes as fans, we can be jaded or cynical and it's like, oh, good, they canceled that crappy show I never liked anyway. I promise you someone cried. Someone, that created it, their life was ruined. Temporarily, you move on, and that's the beauty of human beings, that we're resilient and we dust the dirt off our shoulder and move on. But at that stage, it was very traumatic for someone or for a group of people.
Yeah, especially when so much goes into animation versus when you think about it, like with live action versus animation. Animation is made from the ground up, from thin air. Honestly, it's because everything is created with a purpose for being there and being a part of the story. So it's like, everything is created from your mind, from your imagination. And with that, it comes from passion as well. So yeah, it'd be incredibly hard.
Yeah. I mean, right down to like the design of the bowls, that sit on the table, or everything is a discussion that's had. And also when you're show running, you start to get into this momentum where you're like, constantly planning the future. So it's like season 1 is going to be good, but for season 2, we're going to do this and this and this. And, you're hiring writers and directors that will work on it and blocking stuff out. So it's not unlike, expecting a baby. So you repaint the office so that it's now a nursery and you buy a crib and all that. And then all of a sudden, there's no baby. And now you're reminded by this nursery that you have in your house. It's really, there's a lot more to it than just finding out in the trades that a show got canceled.
Right.
It's pretty devastating. I'm not sure why I feel compelled to share this, but I think it's worth mentioning that, there's cool parts of this industry where you're editing your Clone Wars episode with George Lucas and his son. And then there's the other side where, there's heartbreak and And it kind of happens in these weird waves all the time. So you just got to kind of roll with it.
Yeah.
And like that's something too that like as millennials and like the streaming age has shown, like, you know, having shows end like that really sticks with people. And like, you know, then the networks will get calls like 20 years later. It's like, hey, you know, we really want you to finish Hey Arnold, or you know, whatever it is. And like I think that's like personally my most refreshing like experience viewing all this from an outside perspective, is just like people still caring about the thing you did like 10 years, 15 years ago, and are upset that you like it didn't close off correctly, and you know, just like still really want that closure. And you know, it shows you like, and that's kind of like the same thing with going to conventions and stuff, is like, you know, a lot of the creators who don't do that often like get reminded by real people that their thing really like saved their life or helped them introduce them to their friends, or you know, whatever the case. And you're like, oh wow, I'm making a difference and not just drawing doodles all day, you know.
Those stories are always like really I can't articulate it. Like I feel like sometimes people say it's humbling, and I suppose it's part humbling, but it's also, you almost can't wrap your head around it, that like there's people that tell me like, you know, they got self-esteem or they didn't have it, or they went through like a really traumatic accident and they you know, affiliated marathoning the show through their physical therapy. It's like it's hard to really I don't know, just like feel it, you know. And you almost don't know how to respond to it, but it's a beautiful thing. And I also feel like I also acknowledge that there's some shows that I do that are just like, you know, it sort of made me laugh every day after work. and that's fine too. You know, there's like a small purpose to it, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think, and you know, that's kind of the beauty of it, is you can kind of just, there's a lot of different tones that, you know, each show can take. But yeah, I think we can wrap. I don't have any more questions. Lauren, do you have any just general questions as someone who is just like listening most of the time?
I'm vibing. I don't think I have any other questions. I guess maybe just maybe a final note of advice for people who want to get into the industry, or people who are aspiring to get into the industry. Maybe advice from you to the audience for who wants to pursue this.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because the way that I got into the industry is slightly different than what I would tell people in the you know, nowadays. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Sorry. Something. So what I would say nowadays is what I used to do was I would draw all these things in the. Wait, hold on a second.
Yeah, no worries. We've been talking for a while, so if you got a bathroom break.
Yeah, I'm getting a little distracted things happening in the house. But I will finish by saying this. So when I was, you know, the thing that trained me up was that I was doing all this drawing, you know, that was like storytelling and comics and stuff like that. And that's at the very base, that's what you need to do, is like draw a ton and practice your storytelling chops. That's what's going to like get you through this. Back in the days, you know, it used to be like you'd make a portfolio and you'd have to ship it to the studios, you know, and it was very expensive, you know, because sometimes I'd have to include like return address and like, you know, ship it to LA and then have it sent back to me. But, you know, nowadays with online portfolios and Instagram accounts, it's so much easier to just get yourself out there. I have on many occasions been sent someone's Instagram link and I just look at it and within seconds go, oh, they're awesome, let's hire them. It's literally that fast. So I really encourage people to draw a lot, follow people who are in the industry who post their like production work or even their personal work. And you can kind of decode what they're doing, like the shape language they're doing, like, or the type of storyboards they post. And if you can replicate that to a certain degree where, your work resembles theirs, you'll probably get noticed and get hired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, like, you know, we talk about a lot of the pluses about the COVID stuff and how it's kind of letting people work in a lot of different ways. But I think the negative, too, unfortunately, is a lot of people, like, who are outside the industry don't have as many opportunities to network. And, you know, I think that can be really, like, that's intimidating for me personally, who are just like, oh, just waiting for COVID to be over so I can go back to LA. But, you know, I think to your point, too, it is easier just to kind of practice and get yourself out there, too, and just, like, use this time to practice if that's all you can do. So.
Yeah. And, you know, to be fair, like, I get that we're living in a stressful time, so it's hard to be productive. That there's a side to that, too. But,
that's
you know, I feel like it's a marathon, so it's not just do this now while we're home and there's nothing else to do. Like, it's something that hopefully you're doing all the time, or excuse me, you know, not every waking hour of the day, but you're always like noodling on something here and there, so that you're growing. And, you know, the goal is to get better and to get noticed, or, you know, the opposite route. That's the kind of like how to get hired advice. The opposite route is just make your stuff and post it, you know. But I would advise, on top of that, figure out a way to monetize it, because at a certain point, it's just a hobby if you can't monetize it. And I think that that's cool and commendable. But if you want it to literally be your job, figure out some way where, you know, either you're charging, you know, some sort of Patreon account, or you're making your t-shirts or something. Because if you can pay the bills doing your own work, and not answering to these studios, that's another form of bliss, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a great goal to hit for sure.
Yeah, that's also a good point. You're like, internet gives us a lot of options in general. Well, I guess that's it for now. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We had a lot of time, so and you're super sweet, and I appreciate that you took the time to talk to us and inspire the masses. And I may say masses, like maybe like 100 people, depending on how many people listen to this. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. My apologies that it took so long to finally get this going, but we finally did it.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we definitely did it.
I'm really glad we
now
did. So it's like
you've got my you know, my long old man rants.
Back in my day in humongous entertainment, we had copy paper.
Yes, yeah, totally. It dates me so much.
So yeah, if you're new to the podcast, thanks for listening. We have a ton of episodes at this point. We're like almost to 50, so please feel free to listen. I try to be funny if you don't care about animation, or we try to be. So, you know, hit or miss, I guess. New episodes on Wednesdays. So thanks again. And I guess for the listeners, they're not viewers. I mean, I guess, whatever. I guess for the listener, we'll see you next time, hypothetically.
It's like, good night, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Animation Kimmunication on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider. We are really hoping this show makes a difference in how people view animation and media, as well as giving and providing advice for people all over the world who like or want to join the animation or media industry. If you liked what you heard, please remember to subscribe and rate those 5 stars. as well as tell your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our main YouTube channel, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, and turn those notifications on. My name is Scribbler, and you have been listening to Animation Kimmunication.